This was never supposed to go public. What started as a simple comment from 50 Cent turned into a real-life confrontation with King Harris. No tweets, no warnings. He pulled up in person. But one line changed everything. "You're proving my point right now." Now the internet is asking, was this a reaction or a setup? This wasn't supposed to leave the room. Not the words, not the tension, not the moment that followed, but once the footage surfaced, the damage was already done. Because what looked like a simple industry joke, a slick, almost throwaway comment buried inside an interview, has now escalated into something nobody can fully control anymore. And at the center of it all, King Harris and 50 Cent. At first, people didn't even register it as serious. 50 Cent made a remark about the algorithm, the way attention works in the music industry, how sometimes visibility doesn't come from talent alone but from timing, controversy, and digital momentum. A typical 50 Cent observation. Sharp, sarcastic, layered with that usual edge fans are used to. Most people laughed. Most people scrolled past it. But King Harris didn't. And that's where everything started shifting. Because according to newly surfaced footage now circulating across social media, King didn't treat it like a joke. He treated it like a challenge. And instead of responding online like most would expect, instead of a tweet, a live, a caption, or a clapback, something else happened. Something real. Something physical. The clip that's now spreading everywhere shows a tense face-to-face moment that was never meant for public consumption. No edits, no filters, no polished angles, just raw proximity, body language, and a pressure in the air that feels heavier than anything said out loud. And as King steps into frame, it's immediately clear. This isn't content anymore. This is confrontation. But what the internet is only seeing now is just the surface. Because according to multiple accounts from people who claim to have been nearby, the viral footage doesn't even capture the full exchange. There were words spoken off camera, moments that weren't recorded, shifts in tone that changed the energy completely. And allegedly, one specific comment that pushed everything past the point of no return. Now the internet is split in real time. Half the audience is shocked that King even showed up in person. The other half is calling it inevitable, saying this was years of tension finally spilling over. Because if you zoom out, this didn't come out of nowhere. It's been building. Slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. 50 Cent has built an entire reputation on control, not just in music, but in presence. Strategic comments, industry commentary disguised as jokes, subtle jabs that land harder because they don't sound like attacks at first. He doesn't usually raise his voice, he doesn't have to. The impact is in the precision. And most people in the industry know better than to respond directly. Because engaging with 50 Cent rarely ends at one exchange. But King Harris isn't operating from the same place. He isn't just an artist. He's not just a personality in the industry cycle. He's someone who grew up under visibility where every move gets watched, analyzed, clipped, replayed, and judged in real time. That kind of pressure doesn't just build confidence. It builds sensitivity to disrespect, to perception, to public framing. And that's where the friction started. The algorithm comment may have sounded general to everyone else, but online culture doesn't work that way anymore. Context gets interpreted through identity, timing, and audience reaction. And once fans started connecting the dots, tagging King, reposting the clip, framing it as indirect criticism, the narrative started to lock in. Even if it wasn't explicitly aimed at him, it started to feel like it was. And that feeling matters more than intent in moments like this. At first, King stayed silent. No response, no reaction, no immediate defense. But silence online doesn't mean silence offline. According to people close to the situation, that silence wasn't acceptance. It was observation. He was watching how the narrative formed, how quickly it spread, how people interpreted it, and what it was doing to his name in real time. Because once a public narrative attaches itself to you, it doesn't wait for clarification. It runs, and it grows. Meanwhile, 50 Cent kept moving the same way he always does, unfazed, posting, laughing, treating it like just another moment in the cycle of internet discourse. And that contrast is exactly what intensified things. Because from King's perspective, or at least the way fans are reading it, it looked like dismissal, not acknowledgement, not respect, just another joke in a long line of jokes. And that's where things start to shift psychologically. Because disrespect in private can be ignored. Disrespect in public gets processed differently. It sticks. It builds pressure. It creates a response loop. And that loop eventually leads to action. Which brings us back to the footage. The moment that changed everything. Because instead of escalating online, King allegedly chose physical presence. He showed up, not to perform, not to post, not to signal, but to confront. And that single decision turned a digital conversation into something entirely different. Because now it wasn't about comments anymore. It wasn't about interpretation. It wasn't even about the original joke. It became about respect, presence, boundaries, and control. In the viral clip, the energy is already tense before anything is even said. People around them are aware something is off. The body language shifts before the voices do. And once King steps forward, the space changes completely. You can feel it even through a screen. That moment where everyone realizes, this is no longer contained. But what the footage doesn't show is just as important as what it does. Because according to claims from multiple sources, the recorded confrontation was only a fragment, a preview, a snapshot of a longer exchange that included more dialogue, more tension, and at least one moment that allegedly pushed the situation to its peak. A moment that fans are now trying desperately to piece together. And that's why the internet isn't calming down. It's escalating. Old interviews are being replayed. Past comments are being reinterpreted. Even unrelated moments are being pulled into the narrative as if they were foreshadowing something larger. And in situations like this, perception becomes reality faster than facts can catch up. Now the conversation isn't just about what was said. It's about what it meant. It's about whether this was disrespect, misunderstanding, or something deeper underneath the surface that hasn't been fully exposed yet. Because one thing is becoming clear across every platform. This didn't start with a single comment, and it's not ending with a single clip. And the most dangerous part of all of this, there are still gaps, still missing context, still unanswered questions from both sides, which means the story is still incomplete. And when a situation involving reputation, legacy, and ego is incomplete, the next development usually doesn't calm things down. It escalates them. So now the internet is waiting, not for clarification, but for the next move. Because whether people realize it or not, this moment has already crossed the point where it's just online debate. It's now about response. And in situations like this, response changes everything. This wasn't supposed to spill into the public eye, at least not like this. But once the footage surfaced, once the clips started moving from private corners of the internet into full-blown viral circulation, there was no controlling what came next. Because what started as a casual jab, just another slick comment in the endless cycle of industry talk, suddenly turned into something heavier, something personal, something volatile. And now, something that has pulled two worlds straight into collision. At the center of it all, King Harris and 50 Cent. A confrontation nobody predicted would escalate this far until it already had. At first, 50 Cent's comment about the algorithm didn't feel like anything serious. Fans are used to his tone, sarcastic, layered, almost playful in how sharp it can be. It sounded like just another industry observation, something people would repost, laugh at, and move on from. But King Harris didn't move on. He didn't brush it off. He didn't treat it like background noise. Something about it landed differently. And according to footage now spreading across social media like wildfire, that difference didn't stay internal for long. Because instead of responding online like most people would, King allegedly responded in person. He pulled up. And that one decision changed everything. The clip, grainy, unplanned, and clearly never meant for public consumption, shows a moment that feels almost unreal in its intensity. No edits, no music, no framing, just raw, unfiltered tension between two people standing in the same space for completely different reasons. On one side, King Harris enters with visible emotion, not chaos, not recklessness, but focus. The kind of focus that signals something has already been decided internally. On the other side, 50 Cent stands calm, too calm, the kind of calm that doesn't react quickly because it doesn't need to. And that contrast becomes the entire atmosphere. The moment King steps forward, everything shifts. What was once a room filled with background noise suddenly tightens. Conversations fade. Attention locks in. Phones rise slightly, not because anyone expected a fight, but because everyone can feel something unfolding. King doesn't ease into it. He goes straight to the source, the comment, the meaning behind it, the respect behind it. His voice reportedly sharp, controlled but emotional, demanding clarity in real time. And D 50 Cent. He doesn't flinch, doesn't escalate. He responds like someone observing the reaction rather than participating in it. That alone changes the energy again. Because nothing fuels tension faster than imbalance. One side burning hot, the other staying ice cold. The situation escalates verbally. King pushes harder, pointing to how public words carry weight, especially when attached to someone's name, identity, and reputation. It's no longer about a joke or a comment. It becomes about perception, about being dismissed, about feeling reduced in front of others. And then comes the moment people keep replaying. A slight smile from 50 Cent. Not loud, not mocking, just enough. And in situations like this, even the smallest expression becomes fuel. The distance between them shrinks. Now it's no longer across a room, it's face to face. Personal space disappears. Every word carries weight. Every pause feels intentional. The room itself feels like it's holding its breath. And then 50 Cent says something that reframes everything. Not an insult, not a denial, something sharper than both. You're proving my point right now. That line hits differently, because it doesn't attack, it reflects. It turns the reaction itself into evidence. It shifts the confrontation from emotional to psychological in seconds. And for a brief moment, everything hesitates. Because now the situation isn't just about what was said, it's about what the reaction means, and whether the reaction itself validates the original statement. That's when the internet does what it always does. It splits everything open. Clips get slowed down, audio gets cleaned, angles get compared. Entire threads form within hours, breaking down every movement, every pause, every shift in tone like it's a coded message. And then the second wave hits. Another clip surfaces. This one doesn't show the beginning. It shows aftermath energy, voices louder, emotions less controlled, the conversation more fragmented, and in the middle of it, a line from King Harris cuts through. You keep playing with my name like it's a joke. That's not a question. That's not confusion. That's pressure finally spilling over its limit. But 50 Cent responds again, calm, sharper now. It ain't about your name. It's about what you're doing with it. And that's where the conversation shifts from personal to conceptual. Because now it's not just about disrespect. It's about identity in the industry, reputation versus perception, talent versus attention, legacy versus visibility. And suddenly, fans aren't debating a moment anymore. They're debating meaning. Old interviews resurface. Past comments get reanalyzed. Even unrelated clips are pulled into the narrative, as if the internet is trying to reconstruct intent from fragments. Then comes a background voice in the clip that changes everything again. "This bigger than music, bro." That line opens a completely different door. Because if it's bigger than music, then what is it really about? Power, influence, industry positioning, or something no one has publicly acknowledged yet. And now theories multiply faster than facts. Some believe it's a generational clash, old influence versus new pressure. Others think it's about control over narrative, how attention is created and sustained in a digital era where reaction equals currency. A growing group believes it was never spontaneous at all, that the reaction itself was anticipated, even expected. And that idea changes everything again. Because now fans aren't just watching a confrontation. They're questioning the structure around it. Then a screenshot leaks. Unverified, unconfirmed, but timed too perfectly to ignore. A message allegedly reads, "He walked into exactly what we said would happen." And suddenly, the entire situation becomes unstable. Because if that's real, then this wasn't just a reaction. It was a setup, a predictable chain of events where emotion, response, and virality all feed into a larger pattern. And now the algorithm comment doesn't sound like a joke anymore. It sounds like strategy. Attention, emotion, conflict, reaction, all feeding the same machine. And at the center of it, King Harris and 50 Cent, two names now locked into a narrative neither of them fully controls anymore. Because the truth is, the internet has already taken over the story. And it's still not done writing it. Everything that came after the second clip didn't calm the situation down. It escalated it in a completely different way. Because once that footage hit the internet, it didn't just trend, it detonated. Within minutes, timelines weren't just reacting anymore, they were dissecting. Every frame became evidence. Every pause became a theory. Every facial expression was slowed down, zoomed in, analyzed like the internet was trying to reconstruct a moment that had already happened too fast to fully understand. And the focus wasn't just the confrontation anymore. It was meaning. Because now the question shifted from what age? Append to what does it represent? And that's where the divide became immediate. On one side, people were fully behind King Harris. They saw it as something simple, almost instinctive. Respect being challenged and a young figure refusing to stay silent. The argument wasn't about aggression, it was about presence. "You don't let someone play with your name like that," people wrote. "That's not drama, that's standing your ground." To them, King didn't look reckless. He looked intentional, like someone who refused to be reduced to a punchline, someone who stepped out from behind the screen and made it real. In that version of the story, this wasn't a mistake. It was a statement. But on the other side of the internet, the tone was completely different. Because while some saw courage, others saw a trap. Posts started circulating saying the same thing in different words. He walked straight into it. That this wasn't a victory of emotion, but a collision with experience. That confronting someone like 50 Cent in that way doesn't end in dominance. It ends in control shifting hands. And that's where things got uncomfortable. Because now the debate wasn't about who was right or wrong anymore. It was about strategy versus reaction. And in that space, 50 Cent's history started getting pulled back into the conversation. Old interviews, past feuds, viral moments where he stayed calm while others escalated. The pattern people kept pointing out was simple. He doesn't need to overreact when the reaction itself becomes the outcome. And suddenly, this situation didn't feel isolated anymore. It felt familiar, like a structure people had seen before, but only recognized after it already happened. Then the industry started reacting. Quietly, carefully, no direct statements, no clear positions, just hints. A well-known figure posted something about experience meeting energy without naming anyone. Another wrote about how not every moment needs a response, some moments are watched instead. No context, no explanation, but nobody needed one. Because in the industry, silence isn't absence. It's awareness. And behind that silence, things were reportedly moving. According to people allegedly close to the situation, this wasn't just a viral moment anymore. It was becoming a reputational event. Something that affects perception beyond social media. Something that gets studied, referenced, and remembered. And when that happens, people don't speak loudly. They step back. They observe. They distance themselves quietly before the wave touches them. But the real chaos wasn't happening in industry circles. It was happening online. Because fans weren't just reacting, they were building entire narratives. Some said this was King Harris stepping into independence, refusing to be overshadowed, refusing to be minimized. A moment where emotion turned into presence. Others argued the opposite, that he was pulled into a situation designed to produce exactly this kind of reaction, that the outcome wasn't accidental, it was predictable. And then there was a third group, the ones who weren't arguing about sides at all. They were looking at timing, because from the original comment, to the online reaction, to the face-to-face confrontation, to the leaked clips, everything seemed to unfold with a strange rhythm. Too connected, too clean, too fast. And that's where the conversation shifted into something more unsettling. Because once people start seeing patterns, they stop seeing randomness. They start seeing design. Meanwhile, King Harris remained mostly silent. No detailed breakdown, no long explanation, no attempt to fully control the narrative. Just fragments. And that silence became its own kind of signal. Some said he was processing it privately. Others believed he was waiting for the right moment to respond. But a growing number of people thought something else entirely. That after the confrontation, after seeing the reactions, something about the situation didn't feel the same to him anymore. Like he was beginning to see the structure underneath the moment. And if that's true, then the story isn't over. Not even close. Because silence in situations like this doesn't usually mean resolution. It means recalibration. And while the internet stayed loud, while theories multiplied, while every clip was replayed into exhaustion, something else was reportedly happening behind the scenes. A second interaction. Not filmed, not posted, not meant for public consumption. No audience. No cameras. Just a smaller circle. And according to unverified but rapidly spreading claims, the energy in that moment was completely different. No aggression. No performance. Just conversation. And that alone shifted everything again. Because if the public moment was tension, then what was the private one? Correction, clarification, control, or something else entirely? That's where the final layer of the story begins to surface. One alleged account claims that during that private exchange, 50 Cent said something that didn't feel like a diss, or a joke, or even a challenge. It felt like direction. Something along the lines of, "You gotta understand what game you're stepping into." And that line changes how everything is being reinterpreted. Because now, it's no longer just about a comment or a confrontation. It becomes about awareness. about understanding context before reaction, about whether the moment was misread or fully understood too late. And that's why this situation refuses to settle. Because every time it feels like the story has reached a conclusion, another layer appears underneath it. A new angle, a new clip, a new interpretation. And the more it gets analyzed, the less certain it becomes. Was this ego meeting ego? Was this a misunderstanding amplified by the internet? Or was this something far more intentional than anyone wants to admit? Right now, there's no final answer. Only fragments. And in those fragments, the internet keeps building theories, breaking them apart and rebuilding them again. Because the truth is, this wasn't just a confrontation anymore. It became a narrative battle. And in that battle, nobody is fully in control of the story, not even the people inside it. It was never just about a confrontation anymore. Not at this point. What started as a comment, then a reaction, then a face-to-face moment in a room full of shifting energy, has now turned into something far more layered. Something that doesn't sit in the category of simple beef or internet drama. Because underneath everything we've seen, there's a second level to this situation that's starting to surface. A level about understanding, about awareness, about what it actually means to move in a space where nothing stays private for long, where every word becomes content, and where every reaction can be turned into a narrative that lives far beyond the moment it happened. And this is where things start to shift again. Because right after the alleged private exchange that people are still trying to decode, something subtle appeared online. Not viral, not trending, not pushed by algorithms, just noticed by people paying very close attention. A short clip. King Harris off guard. No confrontation, no visible tension, just movement, conversation in the background, a normal moment that shouldn't have meant anything at all. But then comes the line. One sentence. I see it now. No explanation, no follow-up, no context. Just that. And somehow, that becomes one of the most replayed fragments of the entire situation. Because now the internet is stuck on a single question. What does he see? What changed between the confrontation and this moment? What clicked behind the scenes that didn't click in front of everyone else? And suddenly, everything gets reinterpreted through that lens. Because if that moment is real, not edited, not misunderstood, not taken out of context, then the story stops being about a clash. It starts looking like a lesson. And that changes everything. Because now people aren't just replaying the confrontation anymore. They're rebuilding the timeline. The original comment. The online reaction. The emotional buildup. The face-to-face moment. The viral clips. The alleged private exchange. And now this quiet realization in a passing moment. And when you connect it all, it stops feeling random. It starts feeling structured. Almost like each moment pushed the next one forward. And that's where the conversation gets uncomfortable again. Because now the internet is split in a completely different way. Some people are saying this was never personal, it was educational. That King Harris didn't just react to disrespect, he experienced how the system around attention actually works, how quickly words turn into narratives, how reactions turn into content, how moments get amplified until they become something bigger than the people inside them. To them, this wasn't a loss or a win. It was exposure, a real-time lesson in how perception is built. But others don't see it that way at all. They believe King walked straight into something he didn't fully understand, that the situation wasn't just emotional, it was structural, that once the comment went public, the reaction was already part of a larger cycle he couldn't control. And in that version of the story, the confrontation wasn't the climax. It was the trigger. And that brings everything back to one name: 50 Cent. Because whether people like it or not, he's not new to this space, not new to controversy, not new to shaping narratives simply by reacting or not reacting in certain ways. And that's why the debate has shifted again. Was this a natural, emotional escalation? Or was it something that unfolded exactly the way attention always unfolds in the digital era, predictable, repeatable, and self-amplifying? Because the pattern is hard to ignore. A comment drops. It spreads. A reaction builds. A confrontation happens. Footage leaks. The internet explodes. Every stag. He feeds the next. And that structure alone is what's making people uncomfortable. Because if it wasn't random, then what was it? And that question leads straight back to that private moment. Another alleged interaction that wasn't filmed, wasn't posted, wasn't meant to be public. Just conversation. No shouting. No performance. No audience. And according to unverified claims spreading online, that's where something was said that reframed everything. Not an insult. Not a diss. Something closer to a warning. You gotta know what game you're stepping into. And that line is what's now sitting at the center of the entire interpretation war. Because depending on how you read it, it can mean completely different things. Advice, reality, or control. And that ambiguity is exactly what's fueling the next wave of speculation. Because now people aren't just analyzing what happened in public. They're trying to decode what might have been understood in private. And somewhere in the middle of all this, King Harris stays mostly quiet. Not fully absent, not fully present, just fragments. A moment here, a line there, a look, a comment, a short clip. And silence in between. But that silence is no longer being read as emptiness. It's being read as processing, reevaluation, awareness forming in real time. And that brings us back to the most replayed moment of all. I see it now. Because if that line is real in its intention, not just in its audio, then it suggests something shifted internally. Not just emotionally, structurally, like the way he interprets the entire situation has changed. And if that's true, then what comes next won't look like what came before. Because reactions evolve when understanding changes. And that's the part nobody can predict. Now the internet is doing what it always does at this stage, splitting the narrative into competing theories. One group says this was always about respect, pride, and public pressure colliding in real time. Another says it was always about attention, narrative control, and how quickly moments become content. And a third group, the one growing fastest, believes neither side is telling the full story. That what we've seen so far is only the visible layer. And underneath it, something else is still unfolding. Something quieter. Something unfinished. Because even now, with all the clips, all the breakdowns, all the speculation, there are still gaps. Missing context. Unseen footage. Unspoken details. And that's what keeps this situation alive. Not resolution. Uncertainty. And as long as uncertainty exists, the story doesn't end. It expands. So now the real question isn't who said what first. It's not even who reacted the strongest. It's something deeper. What exactly did King Harris realize in that moment? And once that realization fully settles, does it calm everything down? Or does it unlock an entirely new phase of the story that nobody is prepared for yet? Because if there's one thing this situation has proven, it's this. Every time it looks like it's over, it is.